Clara May Whitfield's hand froze over the 36th plate, her heart stopping at the words she'd just overheard through the kitchen door. "Mr. Boone owns this ranch now. Bought it 6 weeks ago from the Austin Bank." The serving spoon clattered against porcelain. The drifter she'd been feeding every morning. The quiet man with storm-gray eyes who'd asked for work. Who'd slept in her bunkhouse. Who'd eaten her biscuits without saying a word. Owned everything. Her kitchen. Her father's land. The future she'd been signing away on Buck's fraudulent papers. And he'd sat at her table for 9 days watching her beg for scraps of a legacy that legally belonged to him. The betrayal tasted like ash. If you want to see how Clara confronts this devastating truth, and what happens when the lies explode in Red Hollow, subscribe to this channel right now. Stay with me until the end of the story, and comment below what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this journey travels. The flour barrel was running low again. Clara stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the broken Spur kitchen, her palm flat against the wooden slats, calculating. 36 men needed breakfast in less than an hour. 36 plates of biscuits, gravy, eggs when the hens cooperated, salt pork when they didn't. Her father used to say a hungry cowboy was a dangerous cowboy, and Thomas Whitfield hadn't raised a daughter who let men go hungry, even if those men now worked for someone else. Even if this kitchen, this entire ranch, belonged to a name she'd never heard, signed over by a bank in Austin while she'd been burying her father in the Red Hollow Cemetery. She scooped the last of the flour into her largest mixing bowl. The kitchen door banged open behind her. "Coffee ready, Clara?" Buck Tanner filled the doorway, foreman of Broken Spur for the past 8 months. He'd been a decent ranch hand when her father was alive. Now he wore authority like an ill-fitting suit, all sharp edges and borrowed swagger. 10 minutes, Clara said without turning around. "Same as every morning for the past 6 years. Bank man's coming by later. Need you to sign some papers." Her hands stilled in the flour. "What papers?" "Supply invoices. Nothing important." Buck's boots scraped against the floorboards as he crossed to the coffee pot. "Just routine accounting." Nothing about Buck Tanner was routine anymore. Clara had learned to read lies in the tightness of a man's jaw, the way his eyes skipped sideways when he spoke. Her father had taught her that too, how to measure a man's honesty by what he wouldn't look at directly. "I'll need to review them first," she said. "Clara," Buck's voice dropped into that dangerous territory between friendly and threatening. "You're the cook here, not the accountant, not the owner. Just sign where I tell you and keep feeding the men. That's what you're good at." The biscuit dough beneath her fingers crumbled. She wanted to throw the mixing bowl at his head, wanted to scream that her father had built this ranch from nothing, that she'd grown up counting cattle and mending fences, that she knew every acre of Broken Spur better than Buck knew his own reflection. Instead, she said, "The coffee's on the stove." Because that's what widows did in 1879 Texas. They swallowed rage and served breakfast. Buck poured his coffee and left without another word. Clara's knuckles whitened around the bowl's edge. 6 years of feeding ranch hands. 6 years of keeping this kitchen running while men came and went, while her father's health failed, while debt collectors circled like vultures. And now she was signing papers she couldn't read, watching Buck skim profits she couldn't prove, trapped in a kitchen that legally belonged to someone back east who'd probably never set foot on Texas soil. The eastern sky was bleeding pink when she heard the horse. Single rider, moving slow, the kind of careful approach that said either caution or exhaustion. Clara wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the kitchen porch. The morning air tasted like dust and coming heat. 30 yards out, a man on a tired bay horse picked his way through the ranch gate. He sat tall in the saddle, despite obvious weariness. Dark hair, dark coat, the kind of stillness that made you notice him even before you saw his face. When he swung down from his horse, his movements had the practiced economy of someone who'd spent more nights sleeping rough than in a bed. "Kitchen's through there," Clara called out. "Breakfast in 20 minutes, if you're looking for work." The stranger tied his horse to the rail and looked at her for the first time. His eyes were the color of winter storms. "Elias Boone," he said. "Heard you might be hiring hands." "Foreman does the hiring, not me. But we feed anyone willing to work." Clara studied him the way she studied all drifters, looking for the telltale signs of trouble. Booze on the breath, tremor in the hands, that particular kind of desperation that turned men mean. "You know cattle?" "Some." "Can you mend fence?" "Better than most." "Then you'll probably get work." Clara turned back toward the kitchen. "Wash up at the pump. Don't sit at the table with dirty hands." She didn't see the way Elias Boone stood there for a long moment, his gaze traveling across the ranch buildings, the corrals, the rolling pasture lands stretching toward the horizon. Didn't see the tightness in his jaw or the way his fingers curled into fists at his sides. This was his land. Every fence post, every building, every blade of grass. He'd bought it sight unseen 6 weeks ago from an Austin bank eager to unload a property tangled in debt and corruption. The paperwork sat in his saddlebag, clean title, legal transfer, his name in black ink where Thomas Whitfield's used to be. But the woman on that porch, flour-dusted, defiant, feeding men from a kitchen that no longer belonged to her father, she hadn't appeared in any bank document. Elias washed his hands at the pump and followed the smell of coffee into the kitchen. The interior was spotless despite its age. Cast iron pans hung in perfect order. The long dining table could seat 40 men and showed the wear of thousands of meals served. At the far end, Clara worked with the efficient precision of someone who'd learned to cook for crowds before most girls learned to read. "Sit anywhere," she said without looking up. "Coffee's on the table." Elias took a seat at the far end, his back to the wall. Old habit. In his line of work, you didn't sit with your back to doors. The other hand started filing in, dust-stained, weathered men who'd spent their lives in saddles. They filled the benches with the easy familiarity of routine, passing coffee pot and sugar bowl without speaking. Cowboys didn't waste words before breakfast. "New hand?" A young kid, maybe 17, slid onto the bench across from Elias. "I'm Danny. Work the stables mostly." Elias. "You here for the drive? Buck's been saying we need more men for the fall roundup." "Just looking for steady work." Danny lowered his voice. "Then watch yourself around Buck. He's got a temper when things don't go his way." Before Elias could respond, Clara appeared with the first platter. Biscuits, golden and steaming. She moved down the table with practiced efficiency, serving each man with the same careful attention. When she reached Elias, she set his plate down and met his eyes for half a second. "You'll see Buck after breakfast," she said. "He'll tell you what work needs doing." Appreciated. She moved on, but Elias found himself watching her. The way she noticed Danny's bruised knuckles and brought him extra butter without being asked. The way she counted heads automatically, making sure no one went without. The way she served the hands who called her ma'am and the ones who called her Clara with equal care, never showing preference, never showing the exhaustion that had to be grinding her down. This was a woman who'd turned service into resistance. Buck Tanner entered last, claiming the head of the table like it was a throne. "Clara, the bank man's here early. Need you in the office." Clara's hands tightened on the coffee pot. "I'm serving breakfast." "The boys can serve themselves for 5 minutes." Buck's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This is business." The kitchen went silent. 36 men pretending not to hear the tension crackling between cook and foreman. Cowboys learned early to keep their heads down when management fought. Except Elias. "Ma'am's busy," he said quietly. "Bank business can wait for breakfast to finish." Every head in the room turned toward him. Buck's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "You've been on this ranch for about 10 minutes, friend. I'd be careful about what opinions you share." "Not sharing opinions." Elias kept his voice level, conversational. "Just observing that a woman feeding 36 men probably shouldn't be interrupted for paperwork. Seems inefficient." The silence stretched tighter. Clara's voice cut through it. "It's fine. Danny, finish serving." She set the coffee pot down with careful precision and walked toward the office, her spine straight as a rifle barrel. Buck followed, his boots heavy with satisfaction. The moment the door closed behind them, the kitchen erupted in low conversation. Danny leaned across the table toward Elias. "That was either real brave or real stupid." "Maybe both," Elias admitted. "Buck don't forget when someone challenges him. And Clara," Danny hesitated. "She appreciates the gesture, but she's got to work with him every day after you've drifted on. Standing up for her just makes things harder." Elias absorbed that. The kid was right, of course. But he hadn't been able to stop himself. Watching Buck Tanner manipulate a woman who didn't know she was being robbed daily. It made his blood run cold. Because Elias knew exactly what was happening. He'd seen the doctored accounts, the inflated supply costs, the cattle sales that never appeared in the ranch ledgers. Buck Tanner had been stealing from Broken Spur for months, building his own fortune, while the ranch drowned in manufactured debt. And Clara signed whatever papers Buck put in front of her, believing she was protecting her father's legacy. In the office, Clara stared at the invoice the bank representative had spread across the desk. The numbers swam. "This can't be right," she said. "We didn't order this much grain last month." "Buck's signature is right here." The bankman, a thin fellow with ink-stained fingers, tapped the page. "And here. And here." "But I do the food inventory. I know exactly what we use." Buck leaned against the desk, his posture deliberately casual. "Clara, you're a fine cook, but you're not a ranch manager. Sometimes we order supplies you don't see. Feed for the workhorses, grain for the breeding stock, things outside the kitchen." She wanted to call him a liar, wanted to demand an audit, wanted to... But what evidence did she have? Buck controlled all the accounts. The bank trusted his signature over her word. And she was just the cook now, not the owner's daughter, not anyone with legal standing. "Sign here," the bankman said, pushing the paper toward her. Clara's hand hovered over the pen. Everything in her father's blood screamed not to sign, not to trust Buck's word, not to add her name to debts she couldn't verify. But if she refused, what then? The bank could foreclose immediately. The ranch would be sold. 36 men would lose their jobs, and she'd lose the last connection to her father's memory. She signed. Her hand shook doing it. When she walked back into the kitchen, every man pretended to be focused on his breakfast. Only Elias Boone looked at her directly, and something in his steady gaze made her throat tighten. He saw it. Whatever had just happened in that office, he understood. Clara cleared plates with mechanical efficiency, her mind elsewhere. The numbers didn't make sense. They hadn't made sense for months. But she had no one to tell. No one who would believe that Buck Tanner, decorated ranch foreman, war veteran, respected community member, was systematically robbing Broken Spur Ranch blind. "Ma'am?" She turned. Elias stood at the kitchen counter, his empty plate in hand. "Thank you for breakfast," he said. "Best biscuits I've had in 6 states." Something about the simple courtesy cracked her composure. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "You need anything washed up?" he asked. "That's not handwork." "I know, but my mother would have taken a switch to me if I didn't offer to help a woman who just fed me." Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. "Your mother raised you right." She tried. Elias set his plate in the washing basin. "I'll check with Buck about work." He left through the back door, leaving Clara alone in the kitchen with dirty dishes and the weight of signatures she couldn't take back. Outside, Elias found Buck near the main corral, watching hands rope horses for the day's work. "You got fence mending experience?" Buck asked, without preamble. "Some. North pasture needs work. Cattle keep pushing through to Johnson's land. Take Danny with you. He knows where the supplies are." "Understood." Buck turned to face him fully. "And Boone? That thing at breakfast, interfering with ranch business. Don't do it again." Elias met his stare without flinching. "Wasn't interfering. Just didn't see the urgency in interrupting a meal. What you see or don't see isn't your concern. You work here. You follow my orders. Clara included. She might have been the boss's daughter once, but that was before. Now she's staff, same as you." Every word was calculated to diminish, to erase Clara's connection to this land. Elias felt rage building in his chest, but kept his voice neutral. "Understood. North pasture. Fence mending. Danny's by the barn." Elias walked away before he said something that would blow his cover. He'd come to Broken Spur to document Buck's corruption, to build a case that would connect the foreman to a larger railroad syndicate forcing small ranchers into foreclosure. He'd expected numbers and ledgers and paper trails. He hadn't expected Clara May Whitfield. Hadn't expected to watch a woman fighting to preserve her father's legacy, while the man supposed to protect it robbed her daily. Hadn't expected to feel his carefully maintained professional distance crumbling with every plate she served, every debt she signed, every moment she stood defiant in a kitchen that used to be hers. Danny met him at the barn with wire cutters and fence posts. "Buck's got you on the worst detail," the kid said cheerfully. "North pasture fence is a disaster. Previous hand gave up after 2 days." "Why's it so bad?" "Ground's rocky, posts won't hold, and every time we fix one section, cattle push through somewhere else." Danny loaded supplies onto a wagon. "Plus it's Johnson land on the other side. Old man Johnson and Buck hate each other. There's been talk about property lines for years." Interesting. Elias filed that information away. They worked in silence for the first hour, the sun climbing toward its brutal midday height. The fence was worse than Danny had described. Posts leaning at drunken angles, wire sagging, entire sections trampled flat. This wasn't normal cattle damage. This was systematic neglect. "Danny," Elias said carefully, "how long has this fence been like this?" "Few months, I guess. Ever since—" The kid stopped. "Since when?" Danny hammered a post, his jaw tight. "Since Mr. Whitfield died. Place has been falling apart ever since. Buck says it's because we're short-handed, but—" He trailed off. "But what?" "Nothing. Not my business." Elias worked another section in silence, then asked, "Clara been signing supply invoices the whole time?" Danny's hammer slipped, nearly catching his thumb. "How'd you know about that?" "Heard Buck mention it at breakfast." "Yeah, she signs them. Buck says it's her responsibility as—" Danny stopped again, shaking his head. "I shouldn't talk about ranch business." "Kid, I've worked a dozen spreads. I know when something's off." Danny looked at him for a long moment, measuring. Then, quietly, "The bills don't match what we actually get. Clara keeps inventory in her head, always has. She knows down to the pound how much flour we use, how many eggs the hens lay, everything. And she's been saying for months that the numbers are wrong. What does Buck say? That she's a woman who doesn't understand ranch accounting. Danny's voice carried an edge of anger. But I help unload supplies sometimes. I see what arrives, and it ain't what the invoices say. There it was, confirmation of what Elias had already suspected. Buck was inflating supply costs, pocketing the difference, and forcing Clara to sign off on fictional debts. Classic embezzlement, made easier because the actual owner, Elias himself, was supposedly some distant investor back east who'd never questioned the numbers. Except he was here now, and he was watching everything. "Does Clara know?" Elias asked. "She suspects, but what can she do? She's got no legal standing anymore. Ranch belongs to some banker in Austin who doesn't care about anything except getting his money. And Buck's got the sheriff convinced he's keeping this place afloat after Mr. Whitfield's poor management." Danny spat the words. "It's all lies, but who's going to believe the daughter over the foreman?" "Me," Elias thought. "I'll believe her." But he said nothing. They worked until midday, then headed back for dinner. The kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and cornbread, and Clara had the table set for 36 again. Her efficiency was almost frightening. This woman could have run a hotel, a restaurant, a dozen enterprises. Instead, she was trapped in a kitchen, signing debts, watching her father's ranch collapse. Elias took his seat at the far end again. Clara served him without meeting his eyes, but he noticed her hands were trembling slightly. Something had happened. Buck entered late, his expression stormy. "Clara, office, now." "Dinner's on the table." "Now." This time, no one pretended not to notice. The entire room fell silent as Clara set down her serving spoon and followed Buck to the office. The moment the door closed, Elias stood. "Sit down," one of the older hands hissed. "Not your fight." "Maybe it should be someone's fight." Elias walked toward the office. Danny grabbed his arm. "You're going to get yourself fired. Or worse." "Probably." He pressed his ear to the office door. Inside, Buck's voice rose in anger. "Told you not to question the numbers." "But this invoice says we bought 300 pounds of coffee last month. Buck, we don't use that much in half a year." "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying the numbers are wrong, and I want to see the actual delivery receipts, not just the bank invoices." A sound like a hand slamming on a desk. "You want to see receipts? Fine. But when the bank forecloses because you've been questioning legitimate business expenses, don't come crying to me. This ranch is drowning in debt because your father was a poor manager, Clara. The only thing keeping it afloat is my work, my decisions, and I don't need some widow second-guessing every purchase." "My father was not a poor manager." Clara's voice shook with rage, and Elias found himself gripping the doorframe to keep from charging through. "Your father," Buck said with deliberate cruelty, "died owing more money than this ranch will ever be worth. The only reason the bank hasn't foreclosed is because I convinced them I could turn things around. So yes, you'll sign what I tell you to sign. And you'll do it grateful that you still have a kitchen to work in." Silence. Then Clara's voice, deadly quiet. "Show me the delivery receipts, Buck. All of them. Or I go to the sheriff myself." "The sheriff works for the bank, same as everyone else in this county."
You think he's going to believe you over me?
"I think he'll listen when I tell him you've been forging supply orders and stealing from—" The sound of a chair scraping violently. Footsteps. The door flew open. Buck stood there, his face flushed with anger. Behind him, Clara stood rigid, her hands clenched at her sides. Their eyes met. Buck's furious, Elias's cold as winter stone. "You got a problem, Boone?" "Heard raised voices. Wanted to make sure everyone was all right." "Everyone's fine. Get back to your dinner." Elias looked past Buck to Clara. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Don't. Not worth it. But it was worth it. She just didn't know that yet. Elias turned and walked back to the dining room. Every hand pretended to be focused on their plates, but the tension was electric. Buck stormed out of the kitchen entirely, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Clara emerged a moment later, her composure intact, but her eyes bright with unshed tears. She finished serving dinner in silence. When the hands filed out for afternoon work, Elias hung back. He waited until the kitchen was empty except for Clara washing dishes at the basin. "Ma'am," he said quietly. She didn't turn around. "You should go, Mr. Boone. Buck's already angry. Don't make things worse for yourself." "I'm not worried about Buck." "Then you're a fool." She scrubbed a plate with unnecessary force. "This is how it works here. Buck runs the ranch. I cook the food. Everyone else keeps their heads down and collects their pay. That's the system." "Sounds like a bad system." "Well, I didn't ask for your opinion." Elias should have left. Should have gone back to fence mending, kept his cover intact, continued building his case against Buck Tanner's corruption in silence. But he couldn't watch this woman fight alone anymore. "The supply invoices," he said. "They're fake." Clara's hands stilled in the wash water. She turned slowly, her eyes searching his face. "What did you say?" "The numbers Buck's making you sign. They're inflated. I'd bet my horse on it." "How would you know that?" "Because I own this ranch, and I've seen the real accounts. Because I know exactly how much Buck's been stealing." But Elias couldn't say that. Not yet. "I've worked spreads from Montana to Mexico," he said instead. "I know what supplies cost. I know what a ranch this size should be spending. And I know fraud when I see it." Clara studied him for a long moment. Her father had taught her to read men, and something in this drifter's eyes spoke of knowledge that went deeper than cowhands usually carried. "Even if you're right," she said finally, "what am I supposed to do about it? I have no proof, no legal standing. Buck controls everything." "You could fight him." "With what? Pretty words and righteous anger?" Clara laughed bitterly. "I'm a widow, feeding cowboys from a kitchen that doesn't belong to me anymore. Buck's a decorated foreman, with the bank's support and the sheriff's friendship. Who do you think wins that fight?" "The person who's telling the truth." "Mr. Boone." Clara dried her hands slowly, deliberately. "I appreciate whatever nobility made you listen at that door. But this isn't your battle. You're a drifter. You'll be gone in a week or a month, and I'll still be here, signing Buck's papers and pretending not to notice when the numbers don't add up. That's reality. That's survival." She was right, and Elias hated it. "What if you had proof?" he asked. "Proof of what?" "That Buck's been stealing, that the debt is manufactured. What if you could show the bank, the real owners back east, what's actually happening here?" Clara's expression hardened. "The real owners don't care about this ranch. They bought it for pennies from my father's debt, and they'll sell it the same way first chance they get. Men like that don't care about fraud or justice. They care about profit." Every word hit Elias like a physical blow. She thought he didn't care. Thought the man who'd bought Broken Spur was just another vulture circling a dying ranch. And why wouldn't she think that? From her perspective, that's exactly what had happened. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "what if you're wrong about them? The owners." "I'm not." Clara turned back to her dishes. "Now please, Mr. Boone, go back to work before Buck sees you here. I've had enough trouble for one day." Elias wanted to tell her everything, wanted to reveal that he was the owner, that he'd come to help, that Buck's days of stealing were numbered. But timing mattered. If he revealed himself now, Clara would see it as betrayal. Another powerful man who'd kept her in the dark, made decisions about her life without consulting her. The fact that his intentions were good wouldn't matter. The deception would be unforgivable. So he left the kitchen and went back to fence mending, his mind racing. That evening, after the hands had been fed dinner and dispersed to the bunkhouse, Elias sat on the porch watching the sun bleed out across the Texas horizon. Danny joined him, bringing 2 cups of coffee. "You really think Buck's stealing?" the kid asked. "I know he is." "What are you going to do about it?" Elias sipped his coffee. "Document everything. Build a case. Make sure when the truth comes out, it sticks." "And Clara?" "What about her?" Danny looked at him with surprising wisdom for his age. "She doesn't know you're trying to help her. From where she's standing, you're just another drifter who'll be gone when winter comes. She's learned not to count on men staying." "I'm not going anywhere." "You say that now, but she's been hearing that her whole life. Men making promises and then leaving." Danny stood, stretching. "Just be careful with her heart, Boone. She acts tough, but this place is killing her slowly." Watching her father's ranch die, while she signs papers she knows are lies. It's destroying her from the inside out. After Danny left, Elias sat alone in the darkness, the weight of deception heavy on his shoulders. He'd bought this ranch to expose corruption, to stop a railroad syndicate from destroying small landowners. It was supposed to be simple. Gather evidence, make arrests, move on to the next case. But Clara May Whitfield had complicated everything. She was brilliant and broken, strong and struggling, fighting a battle she couldn't win with weapons she didn't have. And every day he maintained his cover as just another hired hand. He was lying to her by omission. The sound of the kitchen door opening pulled him from his thoughts. Clara stepped onto the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cooling night air. "You're still here," she said. "Seemed like a good night for thinking." She settled onto the porch rail, her gaze distant. "I want to apologize for earlier. You were trying to help, and I—" "Don't apologize. You were right. It's not my fight, but you made it your fight anyway." She looked at him directly. "Why?" "Because this is my ranch. Because Buck's stealing from me and from you. Because watching you suffer for crimes you didn't commit makes me want to burn this whole system down." But Elias said only, "Because someone should." Clara absorbed that. The night insects sang their endless chorus, while the stars emerged overhead, bright and cold and indifferent to human struggle. "Mr. Boone," she said finally, "I need you to understand something. This ranch, Broken Spur, it's all I have left of my father. Every fence post he drove into this hard ground, every building he raised with his own hands, every cow that bears his brand. When I feed those men every morning, I'm not just cooking. I'm keeping his memory alive. I'm proving that Thomas Whitfield built something that mattered." Her voice cracked on the last word. "And watching Buck Tanner destroy it, piece by piece, lie by lie, it's like watching my father die all over again, every single day." Elias felt something crack in his chest. "So yes," Clara continued, "I sign the papers even though I know they're wrong. Because the alternative is losing everything immediately. At least this way, I get to fight a little longer, even if it's a fight I can't win." She stood, wrapping the shawl tighter around herself. "Get some sleep, Mr. Boone. Morning comes early on a working ranch." She went inside, leaving Elias alone with the stars and the terrible weight of truth. Tomorrow, he would start gathering evidence in earnest, would document every falsified invoice, every stolen dollar, every lie Buck Tanner had built into the fabric of Broken Spur Ranch. But tonight, he sat in darkness and made a promise to a woman who couldn't hear him. "I will give you back your father's ranch, Clara May Whitfield. Not because the law says it's mine, but because love and labor should mean more than legal documents. You'll have your fight, and this time you won't fight alone." Inside the kitchen, Clara stood at the window watching the drifter on her porch. Something about Elias Boone didn't fit the pattern of ranch hands she'd known her whole life. He watched too carefully, spoke too precisely, carried himself with the stillness of a man who'd seen violence and chosen deliberation over instinct. She should be suspicious, should keep her distance. But for the first time in 6 months of signing Buck Tanner's lies, someone had looked at her and said, "You're right to doubt." And that small validation felt like water in a desert. Clara pulled the curtains closed and began preparing for tomorrow's breakfast. 36 men needed feeding. Her father's ranch needed protecting. And somewhere in the machinery of debt and deception, there had to be a way forward that didn't end with losing everything. She just couldn't see it yet. But maybe, just maybe, the drifter with storm-gray eyes could. 3 days of watching taught Elias more than 3 weeks of ledgers ever could. Buck met the cattle buyer at dawn on Thursday, when most hands were still stumbling toward the kitchen for coffee. Elias saw them from the north pasture, 2 men shaking hands by the loading pens, money changing palms, while a dozen head of prime beef cattle were herded into a stranger's trailer. The sale never appeared in any ranch record. Elias marked the buyer's wagon as it rolled away. Johnson Cattle Company, painted on the side in faded letters. The same Johnson whose land bordered Broken Spur's north pasture. The same Johnson who Buck claimed to hate. Interesting how hatred didn't prevent profitable business arrangements. "You seein' what I'm seein'?" Danny appeared at Elias's elbow, his young face troubled. "Cattle sale. Cattle sale that won't get recorded," Danny spat into the dust. "He's done it twice this month that I know of. Sells the stock, pockets the money, tells Clara the herd numbers dropped because of disease or predators. She believe him? She doesn't have a choice. She can't count cattle while she's cooking for 36 men. Danny's jaw tightened. "My pa worked this ranch before Buck took over. Said Mr. Whitfield ran the cleanest operation in 3 counties. Now look at it." Elias filed away every detail. The time, the buyer, the number of cattle. Evidence was building, piece by damning piece. But evidence meant nothing if Clara lost the ranch before he could act. That afternoon, Buck called a meeting in the ranch office. Mandatory attendance for all hands. The Cowboys filed in, suspicious and silent, packing the small space until it smelled of sweat and leather and tension. Clara stood at the back, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. Buck leaned against the desk, playing the role of concerned foreman. "Boys, we got a problem. Ranch finances are worse than expected. The bank's demanding payment on outstanding debts, and if we don't come up with cash soon, Broken Spur goes to auction." Murmurs rippled through the gathered men. "How much?" one of the older hands asked. "More than we can raise from normal operations." Buck let that sink in. "So here's what's happening. We're cutting costs. That means reduced wages for everyone, starting next month." The murmurs turned angry. "We already work for less than market rate," someone called out. "Then you're free to find work elsewhere," Buck's voice hardened. "But anyone who leaves forfeits their final pay. Those are the terms." Clara's voice cut through the rising protests. "What about the cattle sales, Buck? We've been selling stock all month. Where's that money going?" Every head turned toward her. Buck's smile never wavered. "Cattle sales barely cover operating expenses, Clara. You'd know that if you understood ranch economics." "I understand economics fine. What I don't understand is how we're selling beef, but somehow deeper in debt than last month. Because your father left this place in shambles. Buck's tone turned cruel. I've been trying to fix his mistakes for months, but there's only so much I can do when the foundation is rotten. Clara went rigid. My father was a dreamer who didn't understand modern ranching. He expanded too fast, borrowed too much, made promises he couldn't keep. And now we're all paying for his poor judgment. The kitchen knife Clara had been using to cut vegetables for dinner was suddenly in her hand. She didn't remember picking it up, didn't remember crossing half the room, but she stood 3 feet from Buck Tanner, with a blade gripped tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Say another word about my father, she said quietly, and I'll show you what his daughter learned about handling knives. The room held its breath. Elias moved before thinking, positioning himself between Clara and Buck. Not blocking her, he'd never insult her that way, but close enough to intervene if violence erupted. Clara. His voice was low, meant for her alone. He's not worth it. He called my father a failure. Your father built something worth defending. Buck's trying to provoke you into doing something you can't take back. Her hand trembled. The knife caught lamplight, throwing shadows across Buck's suddenly pale face. Then Clara lowered the blade. You're right, she said to Elias, then to Buck. But you listen to me. I'll sign your papers because I have no choice. I'll cook your meals because I need this job. But if you ever speak about Thomas Whitfield like that again, I'll make sure every ranch from here to Austin knows what kind of man you really are. She turned and walked out, her spine straight despite the tremor in her shoulders. The meeting dissolved. Cowboys filed out in uncomfortable silence, nobody meeting Buck's eyes. Elias waited until the room emptied before approaching the foreman. That was stupid, he said conversationally. Buck's composure cracked. I don't need advice from a drifter who's been here less than a week. No, you need advice from someone with sense. Clara Whitfield is the only thing keeping this ranch functional. Push her too hard, and she walks. Then what? You going to cook for 36 men while stealing from the accounts? Watch yourself, Boone. I am watching. Watching you make enemies out of the only people who could save this operation. Elias leaned against the doorframe. But then again, maybe that's the point. Hard to steal from a ranch that's running smoothly. Buck moved fast, slamming Elias against the wall. You accusing me of something? Just making observations. Noticed you sold cattle to Johnson this morning. Noticed that sale won't appear in any ledger. Noticed you're cutting wages while pocketing profits. You noticed wrong. Did I? Elias didn't struggle against Buck's grip. Because from where I'm standing, you're running a textbook embezzlement scheme. Inflate costs, skim profits, blame the previous owner, and wait for the bank to foreclose so you can buy the property cheap yourself. Buck's face went purple. I could have you thrown in jail for slander. Slander requires lies. I'm just stating facts. Elias smiled without warmth. So here's what's going to happen, Buck. You're going to step back. You're going to apologize to Clara. And you're going to pray I don't decide to make my observations public. Who the hell do you think you are? Someone who owns this ranch and everything on it, Elias thought. Someone who could end your career with a single telegram to Austin. But he said only, someone who's tired of watching good people get robbed. Buck released him with a shove. You've got until sunset to get off my ranch. Your ranch? Elias straightened his shirt. That's interesting phrasing. You're fired, Boone. Pack your gear and ride out. Can't do that. Then I'll have the sheriff remove you. Elias headed for the door, then paused. You really want to involve Sheriff Morrison? Because I'm happy to have that conversation. Real happy to show him the discrepancies I've been tracking between your invoices and actual deliveries. Real happy to discuss where all those cattle sales are going. Buck's hand dropped toward the gun at his belt. Don't, Elias said quietly. You shoot me, you'll have witnesses. Cowboys talk. And right now, your whole scheme depends on nobody asking questions. He walked out before Buck could respond. Clara was in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she scrubbed already clean counters. She didn't look up when Elias entered. I'm sorry, she said. I lost my temper. Made things worse for everyone. You defended your father's memory. Nothing to apologize for. Buck will fire you. He can't let the challenge stand. Already did. Gave me until sunset. That made her look up. Then you should go. Pack your things and ride out before he changes his mind and has you arrested for something fabricated. I'm not going anywhere. Mr. Boone. Elias, and I mean it. I'm not leaving. Clara set down her scrubbing brush with deliberate care. You don't understand how this works. Buck has connections. The sheriff, the bank, half the business owners in Red Hollow. You're nobody. A drifter with no ties and no protection. He'll destroy you just to prove he can. Let him try. This isn't nobility. This is stupidity. Elias pulled out a chair and sat. Maybe, but I've been thinking about what you said last night. About fighting battles you can't win. About signing papers you know are lies just to survive one more day. What about it? I think you've been fighting alone too long. And I think maybe it's time someone fought with you instead of for you. Clara's throat worked. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything. You could ride out today and find work at a dozen other ranches that don't come with Buck Tanner's complications. Because this is my ranch, Elias wanted to say. Because I came here to stop men like Buck. Because watching you fight for something that should be yours by right makes me angrier than I've been in years. But the truth would sound like another betrayal. Another man making decisions about her life without consulting her. So he said, because sometimes the right thing to do is the only thing to do. Before Clara could respond, Danny burst through the kitchen door, blood streaming from his nose. Buck, the kid gasped. He found out I've been talking to you about the cattle sales, the invoices, everything. Clara grabbed a towel, pressing it to Danny's face. Sit down. What happened? He cornered me by the barn. Said I was spreading lies about ranch business. When I didn't deny it, he... Danny winced as Clara examined his nose. Said if I talk to anyone else, he'll make sure I never work another ranch in Texas. Elias felt rage coiling in his gut. Where is he now? Main house. Said he's sending for the sheriff to deal with troublemakers. The pieces clicked into place. Buck was escalating. Firing Elias wasn't enough. He needed to eliminate everyone who might expose his corruption. Clara, Elias said carefully, how much cash do you have access to? What? Why? Because we're leaving. Tonight. All three of us. She stared at him. This is my home. This is a trap. Buck's bringing the sheriff, which means he's planning to file charges. Probably theft or something equally fabricated. Once you're in jail, he can foreclose on the ranch without interference, buy it himself for pennies, and sell it to the railroad for a fortune. How do you know about the railroad? Damn, Elias had revealed too much. I've seen this pattern before. Small ranches forced into foreclosure, sold to syndicates, turned into rail lines. It's happening all across Texas. Clara's eyes narrowed. You're not just a drifter, are you? Does it matter right now? Yes. The word hung between them, a demand for truth. Elias could lie, could deflect, could maintain his cover for another day, another week, long enough to finish gathering evidence. But Danny was bleeding. Clara was cornered. And Buck Tanner was bringing the law to finish what corruption had started. "No," Elias said finally. "I'm not just a drifter." "Then what are you?" "Someone who bought this ranch 6 weeks ago from an Austin bank. Someone who came here to investigate why a profitable operation was drowning in manufactured debt. Someone who—" Clara's hand cracked across his face. The slap echoed in the sudden silence. "You bastard!" Her voice shook. "You've been lying to me from the moment you rode in." "Clara, don't you dare explain or justify or tell me you had good reasons." She backed away from him. "You let me pour my heart out about my father's ranch, about fighting to save something that didn't even belong to me anymore. And the whole time, you owned it. You owned everything." "I was trying to help. By lying? By watching me sign Buck's fraudulent papers while you sat silent? By letting me believe I was alone?" Clara's voice rose. "I trusted you, and you're just another man who thinks he knows what's best for me without bothering to ask what I actually want." Danny looked between them, confused and hurting. "Wait, you own Broken Spur?" "Yes." "Then why the hell have you been pretending to be a ranch hand?" Good question. One Elias didn't have a good answer for. "I needed evidence," he said. "Against Buck, against the bank, against the whole corrupt system that's been destroying small ranchers across Texas. If I'd walked in as the owner, Buck would have hidden his tracks. This way, I could document everything. Everything except what it cost me." Clara's hands trembled. "Every day I signed those papers, every moment I believed I was losing my father's legacy. You could have stopped it, could have told me the truth, could have saved me from that pain. But you chose your investigation over my dignity." She was right. God, she was so right. "I'm sorry," Elias said, and meant it. "You deserved better. Deserved honesty from the beginning. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just protecting my case." "Your case?" Clara laughed bitterly. "Well, congratulations, Mr. Boone, or whatever your real name is. You've got your evidence. You've exposed Buck's corruption. And in the process, you've proven that you're no different from any other man who's decided what's best for me without asking." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Clara's eyes blazed. "You want to talk about fair? My father died thinking he'd failed. Died believing this ranch would be lost because he wasn't good enough, smart enough, strong enough. And I've spent 6 months drowning in that same shame, signing papers I knew were wrong, believing I was worthless because I couldn't save his legacy. And you could have ended that suffering the day you arrived, but you didn't, because your investigation mattered more than my pain." Every word landed like a physical blow. Danny stood, swaying slightly. "We need to deal with the sheriff situation first. Fight about who lied to who later." The kid was right, but Clara wasn't finished. "Get out of my kitchen," she told Elias. "Clara, out, before I use that knife on someone who actually deserves it." Elias left, because staying would only make things worse. He found Buck on the main house porch, speaking with Sheriff Morrison. "That's him," Buck said, pointing. "The troublemaker I told you about." Morrison was an older man, weathered and tired, the kind of lawman who'd learned to keep the peace by not asking difficult questions. "Mr. Boone? Buck here says you've been threatening him, making false accusations about ranch business." "Nothing false about it, Sheriff. Buck Tanner's been embezzling from Broken Spur for months. I can prove it." "He's delusional," Buck interjected. "Probably drunk. I want him removed from the property." "This property belongs to me," Elias said calmly. "Check the county records. The deed's registered under my name. Has been for 6 weeks." Morrison's expression shifted. You're the new owner? Yes. Then why have you been working as a ranch hand? Because I wanted to see how Buck Tanner was running my investment. Turns out he's been running it straight into the ground while stealing everything that isn't nailed down. Buck's face went scarlet. That's a damned lie. Then explain the cattle sale to Johnson this morning, the one that won't appear in any ledger, or the inflated supply invoices Clara's been signing, or the payroll skimming. Elias pulled a folded paper from his pocket, notes he'd been keeping, documentation of every fraud he'd witnessed. I've got dates, amounts, witnesses, everything you need for charges, Sheriff. Morrison looked genuinely uncomfortable now. This is a serious accusation, Mr. Boone. With serious evidence. Evidence that could be fabricated, Buck said quickly. Sheriff, this man is trying to frame me, because I discovered his relationship with Clara Whitfield. He's been carrying on with the cook, probably planning to manipulate her into... Stop! Elias's voice could have cut steel. Don't you dare bring her into your defense. Why not? It's the truth, isn't it? You've been working close with her, building trust, probably filling her head with lies about how I'm the problem. Buck turned to Morrison. He's seducing her to gain control of the ranch through her influence. Classic conman behavior. Morrison sighed. Mr. Boone, is there truth to Buck's claims about you and Miss Whitfield? There's nothing inappropriate between us. But you have been working closely together. She's the ranch cook. I was, a hired hand. Of course we interacted. And you didn't tell her you owned the property. Elias hesitated. That moment of silence was all Buck needed. See, he's been lying to everyone, including you, Sheriff. How do you know he actually owns this ranch? Maybe he's just a drifter with forged papers trying to steal the property. The deed is registered in Austin, Elias said. You can verify it by telegram. Which will take days. And in the meantime, you're asking me to arrest my foreman based on the word of a stranger. Morrison shook his head. I'm sorry, Mr. Boone, but until I can verify your ownership and examine your evidence properly, I'm inclined to side with Buck. He's been a respected member of this community for years. Respected, Elias repeated. Is that what we're calling it? I'm calling it giving the benefit of doubt to a man I know over a man I don't. Morrison gestured toward the ranch gate. I suggest you leave peacefully, Mr. Boone. Come back when you can prove your claims in a court of law. This was going wrong. Badly wrong. Elias had documentation, witnesses, evidence, but none of it mattered if the local law wouldn't listen. Sheriff, leave, now, or I'll arrest you for trespassing. The irony was almost funny. Arrested for trespassing on his own property. Elias met Buck's eyes across the porch. The foreman smiled, a predator smile, all teeth and triumph. You heard the sheriff, Buck said. Get off my ranch. Not your ranch, Elias thought. Mine. And you've just made the mistake of backing me into a corner. But he went to pack his saddlebags, because fighting the sheriff would accomplish nothing except landing him in jail. In the kitchen, Clara worked with furious efficiency, preparing dinner for 36 men who wouldn't care about the drama unfolding around them. They just wanted food. Danny watched her from the doorway, his swollen nose making his voice nasal. You okay? No. Elias is a liar, like every other man who's promised to help me. He owns the ranch, Clara. That means he can fire Buck, can fix everything. Can he fix the fact that I've been humiliating myself for months? Signing papers, begging for scraps, believing I was worthless, all while he watched? Clara slammed a pot onto the stove. He could have told me the truth any time, but he chose his secrets over my dignity. Maybe he thought he was protecting you. I don't need protection. I need honesty. Clara's voice cracked. I need someone to treat me like a partner instead of a problem to be managed. Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then, he's leaving. Sheriff's making him go. Clara's hands stilled. What? Buck convinced Morrison that Elias is lying about owning the ranch. They're running him off the property. Something cold settled in Clara's chest. But if he owns Broken Spur... Buck doesn't care. He's got the sheriff on his side, and Elias has no way to prove ownership without going to Austin for the records, which gives Buck time to... Danny stopped. Time to what? For clothes. If Elias is gone, and you've got no protection, Buck can push the final paperwork through, force a bank sale, buy the ranch himself. Clara understood with sudden, terrible clarity. Elias had been trying to save her ranch, and she'd just sent him away. She ran, out the kitchen door, across the yard, reaching Elias just as he finished cinching his saddlebags. Wait, she gasped. He turned, his expression guarded. Come to make sure I'm really leaving? Come to... Clara struggled for words. I'm sorry. For slapping you. For sending you away. I was angry and hurt and... You had every right to be. Maybe. But Danny just told me what Buck's planning. And if you leave now, he wins. He gets everything. Elias studied her face. What are you asking me, Clara? I'm asking you to stay. To fight. Not for me, I know I don't have any right to ask that after what I said. But for this ranch, for my father's memory, for every person Buck has stolen from. The sheriff won't listen to me. Then we go over his head, to Austin, to the territorial governor if we have to. Clara's voice strengthened. You said you had evidence. Dates, witnesses, documentation. We use it. We expose everything Buck's done, everything the bank allowed, everything the sheriff ignored. We burn it all down and rebuild it right. That could take months. And in the meantime, Buck will, I know what he'll do. But for the first time in half a year, I'm not facing him alone. Clara held out her hand. Partners? Elias looked at her hand for a long moment. Then he took it. Partners, he agreed. But Clara, when this is over, when Buck's arrested and the ranch is safe, we're going to have a long conversation about trust and honesty and how we move forward. I know. Because I meant what I said. I came here to help, and I'm not leaving until I do. Clara squeezed his hand once, then released it. Then let's start by getting you somewhere Buck can't find you. He's planning something, I can feel it. And if he gets you arrested on false charges... An explosion of sound from the main house cut her off. Glass shattering. Men shouting. The unmistakable crack of gunfire. Clara and Elias ran toward the sound, arriving to find Buck standing over Sheriff Morrison's prone body, a smoking gun in his hand. He was going to arrest me, Buck said to no one in particular. Said he'd been thinking about Mr. Boone's accusations. Asked to see the ranch ledgers. I couldn't. I didn't. Morrison groaned, clutching his shoulder where blood bloomed dark against his shirt. You shot the sheriff, Elias said quietly. Buck seemed to realize what he'd done. The gun dropped from his nerveless fingers. I panicked. He was going to ruin everything. All my work, all my plans. I couldn't let him destroy it. Cowboys were gathering now, drawn by gunfire. They saw Buck. Saw the sheriff bleeding on the porch, saw the truth written in violence and blood. Danny pushed through the crowd. Someone get the doctor, now! 2 hands ran for Red Hollow. Elias approached Buck slowly. It's over. You know that, right? Even if Morrison doesn't talk, there are witnesses. You just shot a lawman. Because of you, Buck's eyes were wild. You came here and ruined everything. It was working. The ranch was mine. Clara signed the papers. The bank believed the debts. I had it all figured out. And then you told the truth, Clara finished. She stood beside Elias, her voice steady, despite the horror in her eyes. You stole from my father, from me, from every person who trusted you. And when you were about to be exposed, you shot a man. Buck lunged for his fallen gun. Elias was faster. He grabbed Buck's wrist, twisting until the foreman cried out. A brief, brutal struggle ended with Buck face down in the dirt, Elias's knee in his back. "Someone get me rope," Elias called. Danny brought it, and together they bound Buck's hands. Morrison, conscious now despite the pain, managed to speak. "Arrest him. Assault on a peace officer. Embezzlement. All of it."
"You're deputizing me?" Elias asked. "Someone has to take him in, and you're the closest thing to authority we've got."
Morrison coughed, wincing. "Besides, I figure I owe you an apology, Mr. Boone. Should have listened to your accusations the first time. You couldn't have known. I should have checked. Should have asked harder questions." Morrison's eyes closed. "Don't make my mistakes. When someone tells you something's wrong, believe them." The doctor arrived 20 minutes later, stabilizing Morrison enough for transport to town. Buck went with them, bound and silent. His empire of lies collapsed to rubble. Clara stood in the yard long after they'd gone, watching the sun set over broken Spur Ranch. Elias joined her, careful to maintain distance. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for—" She paused. "For being honest when it mattered most." "I should have been honest from the beginning." "Maybe, but you're here now. That's what matters." They stood in silence as darkness claimed the sky. 36 men needed feeding. A ranch needed running. And somewhere in the complicated mess of truth and lies, 2 people needed to figure out if trust could be rebuilt from broken pieces. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Clara May Whitfield stood on land that was finally, legally, free from Buck Tanner's corruption. And for the first time in 6 months, she didn't carry the weight of fraudulent debt alone. Elias Boone, ranch owner, investigator, liar who told the truth too late, stood beside her. Not hovering, not controlling, just present. Partners, she'd said. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what they both needed. The ranch hands didn't know what to do with freedom. For 6 months they'd followed Buck's orders, kept their heads down, accepted reduced wages because questioning meant unemployment. Now Buck sat in a red-hollowed jail cell, and 36 men stood in the bunkhouse, looking at each other like prisoners whose warden had vanished. "Who's running things now?" one of the older cowboys asked. All eyes turned to Elias. He stood in the doorway, aware that his answer would shape everything that followed. "Clara and I will manage the ranch together. Anyone who wants to stay on at fair wages, you've got work. Anyone who wants to leave, you'll get your back pay in full. The money Buck skimmed from your wages." Silence greeted this announcement. Then Danny spoke up. "How much back pay are we talking about?" Elias had reviewed the ledgers the previous night, sitting up by lamplight in the ranch office, while Clara inventoried the kitchen. The numbers made his blood boil. Buck was taking 20% off everyone's wages, telling you the ranch couldn't afford full pay while pocketing the difference. Some of you are owed 3 months' worth, some 6. A rumble of anger moved through the bunkhouse. "That son of a—" "We should have known. I got a family to feed. That money would have—" "You'll get it," Elias interrupted. "Every penny. It'll take me a few days to liquidate some assets, but I guarantee you'll be paid what you're owed." An older hand named Pete stepped forward. "Why should we trust you?
You lied same as Buck did. Pretended to be something you weren't. Fair question. One Elias had been asking himself since Clara's palm connected with his face. Because I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust Clara. He gestured toward the kitchen, where lamplight glowed in the windows. She's been fighting for this ranch longer than any of us. She fed you when Buck cut rations. She stood up to him when the rest of us stayed silent. And she's the only person who's earned the right to decide Broken Spur's future. But you own the ranch, Pete said. On paper.
In practice, I'm just someone who bought property I'd never seen to stop it from being stolen by a railroad syndicate. Clara's the one who actually knows how to run this place. Pete studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, I'll stay. But I'm watching you, Boone. One sign you're playing the same games as Buck, and I'm gone. That's all I'm asking. Watch me. Hold me accountable. Elias looked around the room. Anyone else have concerns? A younger hand raised his hand tentatively. What about Buck's trial? If he tells the law we've been helping him, you weren't helping him. You were being robbed by him. There's a difference. Elias kept his voice level. Buck's charges are assault on a peace officer and embezzlement. He'll be focused on defending himself, not dragging you into it. And if he does? Then I'll testify that every man on this ranch was a victim of his fraud. You have my word. The Cowboys dispersed slowly, still uncertain, but willing to wait and see. Elias knew he'd bought himself maybe a week of goodwill before they'd demand proof of his promises. He found Clara in the kitchen, elbow deep in bread dough. She'd been baking since dawn, therapy by flour and yeast. Talk to the hands, he said. I heard. Clara punched the dough harder than necessary. You told them I'm in charge. You should be. I don't own anything, Elias. You made that painfully clear. He pulled out a chair and sat. What if you did? Her hands stilled. What? Own the ranch. What if we made it legal? Clara turned slowly, flour dusting her forearms. Are you offering to sell Broken Spur to me? Because I don't have that kind of money. Don't have any money, actually. Buck made sure of that. Not selling. Giving. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's restitution. Elias chose his words carefully. I bought this ranch without considering who it would hurt, without asking what the people actually living here needed. That was wrong. So I'm trying to make it right. By signing it over to me, by offering you partnership, real partnership, joint ownership, equal say in every decision. Clara laughed bitterly. Why would you do that? You could run this place yourself. Hire a manager. Make it profitable. Why would you give half of it to a widow who threatened you with a kitchen knife? Because profit isn't why I bought Broken Spur. Elias met her eyes. I bought it to stop men like Buck from destroying what good people built. And the best way to honor that mission is to put the ranch in the hands of someone who actually loves it. You don't know me well enough to know what I love. I know you wake up before dawn every day to feed men who barely thank you. I know you've been signing Buck's fraudulent papers to keep this place running, even though it broke your heart. I know you held a knife on a man twice your size to defend your father's memory. Elias's voice softened. I know enough, Clara. She stared at him for a long moment, searching for the lie in his offer. But she'd learned to read men, and whatever else Elias Boone was, he wasn't lying now. I need time to think about it, she said finally. Take all the time you need. And I need to understand what you get out of this arrangement, because men don't give away valuable property without expecting something in return. What I get is knowing I didn't make the same mistakes as the railroad syndicate. What I get is sleep at night. He stood.
But if you want a practical answer, I get a working ranch with someone who knows how to run it. That's worth more than sole ownership of a property I'd mismanage into the ground. Clara returned to her bread dough, but her movements were thoughtful now instead of angry. "The hands are worried about Buck's trial," she said. "I know.
If he claims they knew about the embezzlement, if he tries to spread the blame, he won't. Buck's too arrogant. He'll convince himself he can talk his way out of shooting a sheriff. He'll never admit he needed accomplices." "You sound certain." "I've seen his type before. Men who think they're smarter than everyone else. They'd rather lose everything than admit they needed help, even criminal help." Clara shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "What happens to the ranch if Buck somehow gets acquitted? Can he come back here?" "No. Even if he beats the assault charge, the embezzlement evidence is solid. He'll never work as a foreman again." Elias leaned against the counter. "But you're right to think ahead. We need to formalize the new management structure before Buck's lawyer starts asking questions about ranch ownership." "What kind of questions? Who has authority to testify about the accounts? Who can legally authorize payment of back wages? Who speaks for Broken Spur in court?" Elias ticked off the issues on his fingers. "Right now, technically, only I can do those things. But I'm also the person who infiltrated the ranch under false pretenses. A good lawyer could argue I'm an unreliable witness." Clara's eyes sharpened. "You're saying Buck could use your deception against us?" "I'm saying it's a possibility we should prepare for." "By making me co-owner?" "By making your position legally unquestionable. If you're co-owner, you have standing to testify, to make decisions, to protect the ranch." Elias paused. "And if something happens to me, if Buck's lawyer somehow gets me disqualified as a witness, you can still fight." "Nothing's going to happen to you." "You don't know that. Buck shot a sheriff, Clara. He's desperate. Desperate men do unpredictable things." She shaped the final loaf and covered all of them with a damp cloth. "You think he might come after you?" "I think he blames me for ruining his plans, and I think a man facing prison has nothing to lose." The words hung heavy in the kitchen air. Outside, cowboys moved through their daily routines, but the normalcy felt fragile. Buck's arrest had created a power vacuum, and vacuums had a way of pulling in trouble. Danny appeared in the doorway, his face troubled. "Clara, there's someone here to see you. Says he's from the bank." Clara and Elias exchanged glances. "Show him in," Clara said. The banker was a thin man in a too-new suit, carrying a leather satchel like a weapon. He introduced himself as Mr. Pemberton and refused the coffee Clara offered. "I'll be direct," Pemberton said. "The bank has become aware of recent events at Broken Spur Ranch. The arrest of your foreman, the allegations of embezzlement, the shooting of a peace officer. These developments have created significant concern about the ranch's financial stability." "The ranch is stable," Elias said. "More stable now that the person stealing from it is in jail." Pemberton barely glanced at him. "And you are?" "Elias Boone, legal owner of Broken Spur Ranch as of 6 weeks ago." That got Pemberton's attention. "I was told the owner was an investor from Austin who preferred to remain anonymous. I preferred discretion while investigating certain irregularities in ranch management. Those irregularities are now resolved." "By irregularities, you mean the embezzlement Mr. Tanner allegedly committed?" "Not allegedly. Definitively. I have documentation of every fraudulent invoice, every skimmed wage, every stolen cattle sale. Buck Tanner robbed this ranch systematically for 6 months." Pemberton opened his satchel and withdrew a folder. "The bank's records show a different story. According to our files, Broken Spur Ranch has been operating at a loss since Mr. Thomas Whitfield's death. Mr. Tanner's management improved cash flow and reduced debt. Those files are based on Buck's falsified reports, Clara said sharply. The debt he reduced was debt he created by inflating costs. Can you prove that? I can, Elias said. I've been documenting the discrepancies for the past week. Real supply costs versus invoiced costs. Actual cattle sales versus reported sales. The evidence is overwhelming. Pemberton made a note. The bank will need to review this evidence before making any decisions. Decisions about what? Clara's voice had gone cold. About whether to call in the ranch's outstanding loans. Given the instability of current management, the bank may determine that immediate payment is necessary to protect its interests. Clara's face went white. We've been making payments on time, every month. You've been making payments based on fraudulent accounting. The actual debt may be significantly different than what you believe. Pemberton closed his folder. I'll need access to all ranch financial records. Ledgers, receipts, invoices, everything. You'll have them, Elias said, on one condition. The bank doesn't negotiate conditions. This one you will, because if you call in these loans based on Buck Tanner's fraudulent numbers, I'll file suit against the bank for negligence in supervision of ranch accounts. You trusted a foreman who was systematically robbing both the ranch and the bank itself. That's either incompetence or complicity. Pemberton's expression hardened. Are you threatening legal action? I'm promising it. Buck couldn't have run his scheme without the bank accepting his inflated invoices without question. Either your institution failed in its fiduciary duty, or someone at the bank was getting a cut of Buck's profits. That's a serious accusation, backed by serious evidence. So here's what's going to happen. You'll review the real accounts. You'll recalculate the actual debt minus Buck's fraudulent charges. And you'll extend the ranch a reasonable timeline to pay what's genuinely owed. Elias's voice went hard as iron. Or I'll make sure every newspaper in Texas knows that the Austin Bank and Trust enabled one of the largest embezzlement cases in state history. Pemberton stood. I'll convey your position to bank management. You do that. And while you're at it, tell them Elias Boone isn't some anonymous investor. Tell them I'm the man who brought down the Robertson land fraud case in Colorado and the Carson Railroad Syndicate in New Mexico. Tell them I specialize in exposing corruption in property acquisition schemes. For the first time, real fear flickered across Pemberton's face. You're that Boone? I'm that Boone. Now do you understand why I bought Broken Spur? Do you understand what happens to institutions that enable theft? Pemberton left without another word, his new suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. Clara waited until his wagon cleared the ranch gate before turning to Elias. The Robertson land fraud case? Carson Railroad Syndicate? What are you exactly? Someone who's very tired of watching powerful people destroy the powerless. That's not an answer. Elias ran a hand through his hair. I work for a legal firm back east. We investigate corruption in Western property deals. Railroad companies, banks, land speculators, anyone using fraud to force people off their property. When we find evidence, we prosecute. You're a lawyer? Not exactly. I'm more of an investigator. I go where the crimes are happening, document them, build cases. Then actual lawyers do the courtroom work. Clara absorbed this. How many cases have you worked? 17 over the past 8 years. And how many people have you lied to in the process? The question landed like a punch. Everyone, Elias admitted. In every case. It's the only way to get close enough to see the truth. Does it ever bother you, the lying? Every single time. Then why do you keep doing it? Because the alternative is letting men like Buck Tanner win.
letting them steal and cheat and destroy good people's lives without consequence. Elias met her eyes. I'd rather carry the guilt of deception than the guilt of standing by while corruption thrives. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then, the Robertson case. I heard about that. They said an entire town lost their homes to a railroad company using fraudulent land titles. 300 families. The railroad forged documents claiming prior ownership, then evicted people who'd lived there for decades. We proved the fraud, got the evictions reversed, sent 4 company executives to prison. How long did that take? 2 years, from first investigation to final sentencing. 2 years of lying to everyone you met? Yes. And you think that's justified? I think justice isn't clean. I think sometimes you have to get dirty to dig out the truth. Elias's voice roughened. But that doesn't mean the people I lied to should forgive me. You were right to slap me, Clara. You were right to be angry. I chose my investigation over your dignity, and that was wrong, regardless of my intentions. Before Clara could respond, shouting erupted from the bunkhouse. They ran outside to find Pete and 2 other hands restraining a cowboy Elias didn't recognize. The stranger fought like a cornered animal, his face bloody from someone's fist. "Found him going through the ranch office," Pete said. "He's one of Buck's boys from the Johnson ranch." The stranger spat blood. "I wasn't stealing nothing, just looking for papers Buck wanted me to get." Elias went cold. "What papers?" "Ownership documents, ledgers, anything that shows how you took over the ranch." The man grinned despite his split lip. "Buck says if those documents disappear, you can't prove you own this place. It'll be your word against his, and his lawyer can argue you're just a con man trying to steal property." "Buck's in jail," Clara said. "How is he sending messages?" "His lawyer visits, brings instructions." The stranger shrugged. "I'm just doing what I'm paid for." "You're trespassing," Elias said, "and attempting theft. That's 2 crimes." "Prove it." "I didn't take nothing." "Because we stopped you." Danny appeared with a rope. "What should we do with him?" Elias was about to answer when he saw the flash of metal. The stranger had pulled a knife from his boot and slashed at Pete's arm. The older cowboy stumbled back, cursing. The stranger ran. He made it 20 yards before Danny tackled him. They hit the ground hard, rolling through dust. The knife skittered away. 3 more hands piled on, pinning the intruder until he stopped struggling. "Get the sheriff," Elias ordered. Then, seeing Pete's bleeding arm. "And the doctor. Again." Clara was already moving, tearing strips from her apron to bind Pete's wound. "It's not deep. You'll live." "Bastard came out of nowhere," Pete muttered. "We should have searched him better." "We'll search everyone better from now on." Elias helped haul the stranger to his feet. "How many others did Buck send?" The man stayed silent. "Answer me. How many people are coming to destroy evidence?" Still nothing. Elias leaned close. "You think Buck's going to protect you? He shot a sheriff. He's looking at 20 years minimum. You really think he's got loyalty left for hired muscle?" That got through. The stranger's eyes flickered with doubt. "Last chance," Elias said. "Tell me what Buck's planning, and I'll tell the sheriff you cooperated. Stay silent, and you go down as an accessory to whatever Buck does next." The stranger swallowed hard. 3 of us. One's supposed to torch the ranch office tonight. Destroy all the ledgers and ownership papers. Make it look like an accident. Clara's intake of breath was sharp. "The other one?" Elias pressed. "Don't know exactly. Something about making sure you can't testify. Buck's lawyer said if the primary witness disappears or gets discredited, the embezzlement charges fall apart." Ice flooded Elias's veins. "Disappears how?" I don't know, I swear. I'm just supposed to grab papers. The other two have different jobs. Danny looked at Elias. He's talking about killing you. Or framing me for something. Elias's mind raced. Buck's lawyer must be feeding him strategy. Destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses, create reasonable doubt. Can they do that? Clara asked.
Can they actually make Buck's charges disappear? If they destroy enough evidence and cast enough doubt on my credibility? Maybe. It's not likely, but desperate men try desperate things. Pete finished tying off Clara's makeshift bandage. So what do we do? Wait for them to attack? No. We move the critical documents somewhere safe. We set up watches on the ranch buildings, and we make sure everyone knows there's a threat. Elias turned to the stranger. You're going to tell the sheriff everything you just told me. Every detail. Who hired you, what the plan was, where the other two are hiding. And if I refuse? Then you're an accomplice to attempted arson and conspiracy to commit murder. How many years you willing to serve for Buck Tanner? The fight went out of the man's shoulders. I'll talk. Just don't let them come after me. Buck's people, they don't forget traitors. Buck's people are going to be too busy with their own legal problems to worry about you. The deputy arrived within the hour, a young man who'd been appointed temporary sheriff while Morrison recovered. He took the stranger into custody and listened to Elias's concerns about additional threats. I can post a man here for tonight, the deputy offered. But we're short-handed with a sheriff wounded. Can't provide permanent protection. We'll handle our own security, Elias said. Just make sure Buck's lawyer knows that attempting to intimidate witnesses or destroy evidence will add years to his client's sentence. After the deputy left with his prisoner, Clara helped Elias move the critical documents from the ranch office to a hidden space beneath her kitchen floor. A small cellar that had once held root vegetables now held the proof of Elias's ownership and Buck's crimes. My father built this hidey hole during the border troubles, Clara explained, fitting the floorboards back into place. Said every ranch needed somewhere to protect what mattered most. Smart man. He was. Clara stood, dusting off her hands. He would have liked you, I think, despite the lying. You think? He valued results over methods. Said sometimes the right answer comes wrapped in the wrong approach. She met Elias's eyes. But he also said you judge a man by what he does when the lies fall apart, whether he runs or whether he stands and faces the consequences. I'm not running. I know. That's why I'm still here talking to you instead of throwing you out with Buck's hired knife. They worked in silence for a few minutes, reorganizing the kitchen to hide any evidence of the cellar's location. Finally, Elias said, About the co-ownership offer. I meant it, Clara. This should be your ranch as much as mine, legally and practically. I know you meant it. That's what scares me. Why? Because accepting means trusting you. Means believing you won't use that legal tie to control my life the way Buck tried to. Clara's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Means giving you power over the thing I love most in this world, and hoping you don't abuse it. I wouldn't. You already did. You lied to me for days while I humiliated myself, signing Buck's papers. You watched me suffer and stayed silent because your investigation mattered more than my pain. Clara held up a hand before he could protest. I know why you did it. I understand your reasons, but understanding doesn't mean trusting. Elias nodded slowly. What would it take for you to trust me? Time. Proof. Watching you keep your promises when it's hard instead of easy. Clara's eyes were ancient with hard-learned wisdom. Every man in my life has promised to protect me, Elias. My father promised I'd always have a home. Buck promised to save the ranch. You promised honesty. The difference is,
You're the first one who admitted he broke his word. Does that count for anything? It counts for a chance.
That's all I can offer right now. Elias accepted that, because demanding more would prove her doubts correct. Then I'll work for that chance, however long it takes. Good. Clara moved toward the stove. Now help me prepare dinner. 36 men need feeding, and we've got a long night ahead watching for arsonists. They worked together in the kitchen, falling into an easy rhythm, despite the weight of unspoken words between them. Clara chopped vegetables while Elias tended the roasting meat. Their hands brushed, reaching for the same knife, and both pulled back like they'd touched flame. The tension wasn't entirely about distrust. Some of it was something else entirely, something neither of them was ready to name. The fire started at midnight. Elias saw the orange glow from his watchpost on the bunkhouse roof. Not the ranch office like they'd expected, the barn. Flames crawled up the far wall where hay bales were stacked against dry timber. Fire! His shout shattered the night silence. Cowboys poured from the bunkhouse, half-dressed and running. Clara appeared from the kitchen with buckets already in hand, moving with the efficiency of someone who'd fought barn fires before. "The horses!" Danny's voice cracked with panic. "They're still inside!" Elias was already running. He hit the barn doors at full speed, throwing them wide. Smoke billowed out, thick and choking. Inside, horses screamed their terror, kicking at stall doors. "Get them out!" Elias shouted to the hands rushing in behind him. "Quick release on every stall!" They worked in organized chaos. Each man grabbed a horse, throwing blankets over panicked heads, dragging them toward safety. Elias pulled 3 horses out before the smoke drove him to his knees, coughing. Clara shoved a wet cloth into his hands. "Cover your mouth. Pete's organizing a water line." "There's still 4 horses in the back." "I'll get them. You can't breathe." Clara, but she was already disappearing into the smoke, her skirts hiked up, moving low where the air was clearer. Elias forced himself back in, following her. The heat was brutal now. Flames had reached the loft, spreading across old hay like the devil's own carpet. He found Clara struggling with a terrified mare who refused to leave her stall. "She won't move," Clara coughed. Elias grabbed the horse's halter, yanking hard enough to get her attention. The mare reared, nearly braining him with her hooves, but he held on. Clara threw a blanket over the animal's eyes, and together they dragged her toward the doors. They were 10 feet from safety when a burning beam crashed down, blocking their path. The mare bolted sideways, crashing through a weakened stall wall. Clara went with her, still gripping the lead rope, slamming into a post hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. Elias hauled her upright. "Are you hurt?" "The horses." "Forget the horses. We're getting out. Now!" He half-carried, half-dragged her toward a gap in the flames. They burst through the barn doors just as the roof started collapsing. Other hands were there, pulling them clear, dousing them with water. "Anyone still inside?" Pete demanded. Danny did a quick count of horses milling in the yard. "We got them all 16. Elias looked at the barn, now fully engulfed. The building was lost, but the horses lived. And that's what mattered. "This wasn't accidental," Clara said between coughs. "The fire started in 3 places at once. I saw it when I went in." "Arson," Pete confirmed. "Someone set this deliberately." "Where's the night watch?" Elias asked. "We had 2 men posted. They found the first watchman, unconscious behind the water trough, a knot swelling on the back of his head. The second was missing entirely." "Robert's gone," Danny reported, after checking the man's bunk. "His gear, too." "He must have been the one. He's been here 3 months, Clara said, her voice hollow. "I've been feeding him every day. He seemed like a good hand." Buck probably paid him weeks ago. Just been waiting for the right moment. Elias helped the injured watchman sit up. "How many more people on this ranch are on Buck's payroll?" Nobody had an answer. The fire burned through the night. By dawn,
The barn was a smoking skeleton of charred timber and ash. The hands stood in a loose circle, staring at the destruction. "We can rebuild," Pete said finally. "Won't be easy, but it can be done." "With what money?" another hand asked. "We just lost our working barn. That's thousands of dollars in lumber and labor." "The insurance will—" Clara stopped. Buck handled the insurance policies. Elias felt sick. "Let me guess. He let them lapse?" "I don't know. He said everything was handled, but Buck said a lot of things that weren't true." Elias ran the numbers in his head, rebuilding the barn, replacing equipment, lost productivity while they worked without proper shelter for the animals. It would set the ranch back months, maybe longer. "This was the point," he said quietly. "Destroy our resources. Make the ranch unprofitable. Force us to sell or default on the loans." "Then we don't give them the satisfaction." Clara's voice was steel. "We rebuild. We work harder. We prove Broken Spur Ranch is worth fighting for." "Clara, we might not have the capital. Then we find it. We sell cattle early. We take out loans. We do whatever it takes." She looked at the gathered hands. "My father built this ranch with nothing but determination and borrowed tools. If he could do it, so can we." The cowboys shifted, uncertain but wanting to believe. "What about wages?" someone asked. "If money's that tight, how do we get paid?" "You'll get paid," Elias said. "I guarantee it, even if I have to sell personal assets to make payroll."
"Why would you do that? This is just an investment to you." The accusation stung because it was partially true, or had been when Elias first bought Broken Spur sight unseen. But watching Clara stand in front of a burned barn, refusing to surrender, changed the equation. This wasn't just about exposing Buck's corruption anymore. It was about protecting something that mattered. "You're right," Elias said. "This started as an investment, a case to investigate. But it's more than that now, because everyone on this ranch has been robbed of wages, of dignity, of the right to work without fear of being cheated. And I'll be damned if I let Buck Tanner win by destroying what you've all built together." Pete studied him for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "All right, Boone, you've got my loyalty. But you break your word, and I'll make sure everyone from here to Mexico knows about it." "Fair enough." One by one, the other hands shook his hand too. Not enthusiasm exactly, but cautious commitment. They'd stay. They'd rebuild. They'd give Elias and Clara a chance to prove themselves. After they dispersed, Clara turned to Elias. "That was a good speech." "I meant every word." "I know. That's what worries me." She looked at the destroyed barn. "We're in over our heads, aren't we?" "Completely." "But we're not giving up." "Not even close." Clara laughed, the sound tinged with exhaustion and something like relief. "My father used to say that stubbornness was the Whitfield family curse. Looks like you've caught it too." "Seems that way." They stood in the ash-stained dawnlight, two people who'd started as adversaries and become something else entirely. Partners, maybe, or something more complicated that neither wanted to examine too closely. "I need to send a telegram," Elias said finally, "to my firm back east. Request emergency funds to cover rebuilding costs." "Will they approve it?" "They will, if I tell them this ranch is critical to a larger investigation into railroad syndicate operations, which happens to be true." "Is that all Broken Spur is to you? Part of a larger investigation?" Elias met her eyes. "It was when I arrived. It's not anymore." The banker arrived at noon, bringing the worst possible news at the worst possible time. "The bank is calling in all outstanding loans," Pemberton announced without preamble. "Effective immediately. You have 30 days to pay in full,
or the ranch will be foreclosed and sold at auction." Clara's face went white. "You're doing this because of the fire. Because Buck's people destroyed our barn." "We're doing this because recent events demonstrate gross financial instability. A burned barn, criminal activity, management in chaos, these are not markers of a sound investment." "The only instability came from Buck Tanner's embezzlement," Elias said, "which your bank failed to detect or prevent. Our internal review found no evidence of negligence on the bank's part." "Your internal review lasted all of 12 hours. That's not due diligence. That's a cover-up." Pemberton's jaw tightened. "Mr. Boone, I strongly suggest you reconsider making accusations you cannot prove. The bank has significant legal resources at its disposal." "So do I, and I'm very good at proving corruption." "Then prove it in court. In the meantime, you have 30 days to settle your debts or lose the property." After Pemberton left, Clara sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. "How much do we owe?" Elias had reviewed the actual numbers, the real debt minus Buck's fraudulent additions. $8,000. Maybe less if we can prove some of Buck's invoices were completely fabricated. "We don't have $8,000. We don't have 800. "The cattle are worth something. If we sell the herd, then we have no ranch, no breeding stock, no income, nothing to rebuild with." Clara looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We'd be selling everything my father built to pay debts a criminal created. What if we had more time? If I could negotiate an extension?" Pemberton made it clear, 30 days or nothing. Elias sat across from her. "There might be another option." "What?" "I could buy out the debt, use personal funds to pay the bank directly. Then the ranch would owe me instead of them." "That's not a solution. That's just changing who I'm indebted to." "It would buy us time, and I wouldn't demand immediate payment. We could structure repayment around the ranch's actual capacity to earn." "No." Clara's voice was flat. "I won't put myself in debt to you, Elias. That's exactly the kind of power imbalance that destroys partnerships." "I'm trying to help." "I know, but help that comes with strings attached isn't help. It's control with a prettier name." She was right, and Elias hated it. Because his offer was genuine, he had the resources to save Broken Spur immediately. But Clara had been controlled by men with good intentions her whole life. Her father's well-meaning but poor financial decisions, Buck's promises to save the ranch, the bank's assurances of fair treatment. Good intentions had buried her in debt and dependence. She'd rather lose everything than accept another man's definition of salvation. "All right," Elias said. "Then we find another way." "What other way? We're broke, the barn's destroyed, and the bank wants $8,000 in 30 days. Those aren't problems we can fix with determination and hard work." "Maybe not, but we can expose why we're in this position. Force the bank to acknowledge Buck's fraud reduced the real debt." "You think Pemberton will listen?" "No, but the territorial governor might, especially if I present evidence that a major Texas bank enabled embezzlement and is now using that embezzlement as justification for foreclosure." Clara's eyes sharpened. "You'd go over the bank's head?" "I'd go to Washington if necessary. This isn't just about Broken Spur anymore, Clara. It's about setting precedent, proving that banks can't profit from their own negligence." "That could take months. We have 30 days. "Then we buy those months. We file injunctions, demand audits, create enough legal entanglement that foreclosure becomes impossible until the truth comes out." "That's your world, isn't it? Legal battles and investigations and building cases that take years." "It's how justice works when corruption runs deep." Clara stood, moving to the window. Outside, cowboys were clearing debris from the burned barn. salvaging what little remained. "I don't have years, Elias. I'm 31 years old.
I've been fighting to save this ranch since I was old enough to understand what debt meant. And I'm tired. So tired of battles that never end." The vulnerability in her voice cracked something in Elias's chest. He crossed to stand beside her. "Then let me fight for a while. You rest. You've earned it."
"That's not how partnerships work."
"No. But it's how people who care about each other work."
Clara turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do you care about me?" The question hung between them, dangerous and necessary. Elias could lie, could claim his interest was purely professional, tied to the case, nothing more. But he'd lied to Clara enough already. "Yes," he said simply. "I care. More than I should for someone I've known less than 2 weeks." "Why shouldn't you care?" "Because I'm not staying. Because when this case is resolved, I'll move to the next investigation in the next town."
Because I don't have anything to offer you except temporary partnership and permanent complications. That's honest, at least.
"I'm trying to be. After everything, you deserve honesty." Clara looked back out the window. "My father once told me that the worst kind of man is the one who offers you the world while planning his exit. The second worst is the one who offers you nothing and stays anyway, expecting gratitude for his mere presence. What about a man who offers what he can and tells you plainly it's not enough?" "I don't know. I've never met one of those before." They stood in silence, shoulders almost touching, both watching the ranch hands work. The moment stretched, heavy with words neither could speak. Then Danny burst through the door. "Clara, the deputy's back. Says he needs to talk to both of you, right now." The deputy looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "Sheriff Morrison died an hour ago. Infection from the gunshot wound."
Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Buck Tanner is now charged with murder," the deputy continued. "His trial's been moved up. 3 weeks from today."
3 weeks? Elias's mind raced. "That's before the bank's foreclosure deadline. Judge wants it handled quickly. High-profile case, public safety concerns." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. Buck's lawyer is claiming you orchestrated the whole thing, Mr. Boone. Says you infiltrated the ranch specifically to frame Buck for crimes you committed yourself." "That's insane." "Maybe, but Buck's telling everyone who'll listen that you're a con man, that you forged ownership documents, that you shot Sheriff Morrison and blamed Buck." The deputy held up a hand before Elias could protest. "I don't believe it, but the judge wants to hear both sides. You'll need to testify at the trial." "Of course, I have documentation of everything. Documentation that's now suspect because of the arson."
Buck's lawyer is arguing you burned your own barn to destroy evidence of your fraud.
Elias laughed bitterly. "So Buck steals from the ranch, shoots a sheriff, and arranges arson, but somehow I'm the criminal mastermind?" "Like I said, I don't believe it. But juries get confused by competing narratives, especially when one side has a smooth-talking lawyer and the other has a stranger from back east with a complicated story." Clara spoke up. "What do you need from us?" "Testimony, both of you. Every detail about Buck's embezzlement, the fraudulent invoices, the cattle theft. Everything." The deputy looked at Elias. "And you need to prove you actually own this ranch. Bring the original deed, the bank transfer documents, everything that shows the purchase was legitimate. Those documents are hidden after the arson attempt. Then unhide them. Because if you can't prove ownership, Buck's lawyer will argue you have no standing to accuse him of anything."
The deputy headed for the door, then paused. "One more thing. There's been talk in town. People saying maybe Buck was right about the ranch being poorly managed. Maybe your takeover caused the problems, instead of solving them."
"That's Buck's people spreading rumors," Clara said. "Probably, but rumors have a way of becoming truth if nobody challenges them." You might want to show your faces in Red Hollow. Remind people who Clara Whitfield is and what she's been fighting for." After the deputy left, Elias and Clara looked at each other. A murder trial, a foreclosure deadline, and a reputation to defend, Clara said. All in 3 weeks. When you list it like that, it sounds almost manageable. She laughed, despite everything. You have a strange definition of manageable. I've had worse odds. Have you really? Elias thought about the Robertson case, where an entire town turned against him. The Carson investigation, where he'd received death threats daily. Actually, yes.
This is bad, but it's not impossible. What do we do first? We go to Red Hollow, together. We show people that Broken Spur Ranch isn't falling apart. It's rebuilding stronger. Elias paused. And we tell the truth, all of it. Who I am, why I came here, what Buck did. No more secrets. The whole truth? Clara raised an eyebrow. Including the part where you care about me more than you should? That's not relevant to the case. But it's true. Yes. Clara stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. Then maybe we tell that truth too. Because people trust authenticity, Elias. They forgive mistakes if they believe you're genuinely trying to do right. And right now, we need trust more than we need perfect strategy. She was right. She was so often right it made his chest ache. All right, he said. Complete honesty. Starting now. Then tell me something true. Something you haven't said to anyone else. Elias could deflect, could choose a safe truth, something professional and distant. But Clara deserved better. I came to Broken Spur planning to document Buck's crimes and leave, he said quietly. Move on to the next case without attachment or complication. But watching you fight for this ranch, watching you sign Buck's papers knowing they were lies, watching you feed men who barely thanked you, watching you refuse to surrender even when surrender made sense, it changed something in me, made me want to fight for something instead of just against something. And what do you want to fight for? You, this ranch. The idea that good people shouldn't lose everything just because corrupt people are better at lying. Clara's hand found his, her fingers threading through his. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, even if it does involve embezzlement and legal precedent. I'm not good at romance. I don't need good at romance. I need someone who stands with me when things get hard. Someone who tells me the truth, even when it's ugly. Someone who... The kiss surprised them both. One moment they were talking, and the next Clara's mouth was on his, fierce and desperate, and asking questions neither could answer with words. Elias responded without thinking, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer. She tasted like coffee and determination, and everything he hadn't known he needed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara's eyes were bright. That was a mistake, Elias offered. I was going to say inevitable. Clara stepped back, smoothing her skirts with shaking hands. But also complicated. Very, very complicated. We don't have to, I know, but I wanted to. Have been wanting to since you stood between me and Buck with that knife. Maybe before that. She looked at him directly. I don't trust easy, Elias, but I'm choosing to trust you. Choosing to believe you'll stay as long as you can and leave honestly when you must. That's all I can ask. It's more than I deserve. Probably. But we don't get what we deserve. We get what we fight for. Clara moved toward the door. Now let's go to Red Hollow and fight for this ranch's reputation. And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll save more than just property. They rode into town together an hour later. Clara in her best dress,
and Elias in clean clothes borrowed from Pete. The main street fell silent when they appeared, every eye tracking their progress. Clara dismounted in front of the general store, her spine straight and her voice carrying. "I'm Clara May Whitfield. My father was Thomas Whitfield, who built Broken Spur Ranch with honest work and fair dealing. Some of you knew him. Some of you bought cattle from him. All of you know what kind of man he was." People gathered, curious and cautious. "For the past 6 months, Buck Tanner has been stealing from my father's ranch, embezzling money, falsifying records, destroying everything good my father built."
And when he was caught, he shot Sheriff Morrison rather than face justice. "Buck says you're lying," someone called out. "Says the stranger beside you is the real criminal." Clara didn't flinch. "Then ask yourselves, why would a stranger from back east spend weeks working as a ranch hand for regular wages? Why would he document every theft instead of joining the scheme? Why would he risk his life pulling horses from a burning barn that Buck's people set?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elias spoke up. "My name is Elias Boone. I investigate property fraud and corruption. I bought Broken Spur Ranch to stop it from being stolen by a railroad syndicate. I deceived Clara about my identity, which was wrong. But every accusation against Buck Tanner is documented and provable." "Prove it," someone demanded. "I will, at the trial, in front of a judge and jury, with evidence Buck's lawyer can't explain away." Elias's voice hardened. "And when Buck is convicted, everyone who profited from his crimes will be held accountable. The bank that ignored the fraud, the sheriff who sided with the criminal over the victim, anyone who enabled theft will answer for it." The crowd shifted, uncertain now. An older woman stepped forward. "I knew your father, Clara. He helped my family when we had nothing, gave us credit when no one else would. If you say Buck stole from his ranch, I believe you." Others nodded, a tide slowly turning. Clara felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. That means everything." The woman looked at Elias. "You planning to stay, or just passing through once your investigation's done?" It was the question everyone wanted answered. Elias looked at Clara, then back at the gathered crowd. "I'm staying as long as Clara will have me. As long as Broken Spur needs defending. As long as there's work to be done, making things right." "That's not much of a commitment," someone muttered. "It's the truth," Clara said firmly, "which is more than Buck Tanner ever offered, more than the bank offered, more than anyone who promised to save my father's ranch while robbing it blind." She looked around at her neighbors. "I'm asking you to judge us by our actions, not our words. Come to the trial, hear the evidence, and then decide who's telling the truth." They rode back to Broken Spur in silence, both processing what had just happened. The kiss, the public declaration, the commitment made in front of witnesses. "That went better than expected," Clara said finally. "Or worse, depending on how you measure it." "How do you measure it?" Elias was quiet for a moment. "I measure it by how much I have to lose now. When I arrived, losing this case meant professional embarrassment. Now it means losing you, losing this ranch, losing the first place I felt like I belonged in 8 years of investigations." "You belong here?" "I'm starting to think I might," Clara smiled, tired but genuine. "Then let's make sure we don't lose any of it." They had 3 weeks to prepare for a trial that would determine everything. 3 weeks to prove Buck's guilt, establish Elias's credibility, and save a ranch from foreclosure. 3 weeks to build something worth keeping. And for the first time since her father's death, Clara believed it might actually be possible. The trial started on a Tuesday that felt like the end of the world. Clara sat in the front row of the Red Hollow courthouse, her hands folded in her lap
to hide their trembling. Beside her, Elias reviewed his notes one final time, his jaw tight with concentration. Behind them, the courtroom filled with ranchers, townspeople, and cowboys from Broken Spur. Everyone who'd been touched by Buck Tanner's corruption or wanted to see how the story ended. Buck sat at the defense table in a clean suit that made him look respectable and wronged. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from Austin named Caldwell, leaned close to whisper strategy. Buck nodded, his expression carefully crafted into wounded innocence. Clara wanted to throw something at his lying face. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Warren." The judge was a weathered man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He settled into his chair and surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious distaste. "This is a murder trial, not a social gathering," he said. "Anyone who can't maintain proper courtroom decorum will be removed. Is that clear?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "Mr. Caldwell, you may present your opening statement." Buck's lawyer stood, all polished confidence and strategic pauses. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is about a dangerous man who came to Red Hollow under false pretenses. Elias Boone infiltrated Broken Spur Ranch, deceived its employees, manipulated a grieving widow, and when my client discovered the deception, Mr. Boone murdered Sheriff Morrison to silence the one man who could expose his crimes." Clara's hands clenched so hard her nails drew blood. "The prosecution will claim Buck Tanner embezzled from the ranch. But the evidence shows a different story. Mr. Boone bought Broken Spur Ranch through questionable means, then created false documentation to frame my client for crimes Mr. Boone himself committed. And when Sheriff Morrison began investigating, Mr. Boone shot him and blamed Buck Tanner, a respected foreman who dedicated his life to saving a failing ranch." Caldwell turned to face the jury directly. "Ask yourselves, who is more likely to commit murder? A local man with years of service? Or a stranger from back east with a history of infiltrating communities under assumed identities? The answer should be obvious." He sat down, satisfied. The prosecutor, a young man named Harris, who looked nervous, stood for his opening statement. "Your Honor, the evidence is straightforward. Buck Tanner embezzled over $12,000 from Broken Spur Ranch. When confronted by Sheriff Morrison, Mr. Tanner shot him rather than face justice. We have witnesses, documentation, and Mr. Tanner's own admission that he pulled the trigger." "My client fired in self-defense," Caldwell interrupted. "Sheriff Morrison drew his weapon first." "That's not what the deputy testified during the preliminary hearing," Harris countered. "Then we'll let the witnesses speak for themselves." Judge Warren banged his gavel. "Mr. Harris, call your first witness." The prosecution calls Clara May Whitfield. Clara stood on legs that felt like water. She testified before: small claims disputes, property line disagreements, the routine business of ranching. But never with so much at stake. Never with Buck's cold eyes tracking her every movement. The bailiff swore her in. Clara's hand trembled on the Bible. "Miss Whitfield," Harris began gently, "please tell the court your relationship to Broken Spur Ranch." "It was my father's ranch. Thomas Whitfield built it from nothing over 30 years. When he died 6 months ago, the ranch fell into debt and was sold to—" She glanced at Elias. "To Mr. Boone. But I stayed on as cook." "And Buck Tanner was the foreman?" "Yes." "Did you notice anything unusual about the ranch's finances under Mr. Tanner's management?" Clara's voice strengthened. "The numbers never made sense. Buck would bring me supply invoices to sign, but the amounts were wrong. We'd order 50 pounds of flour according to the invoice, but only 25 would arrive. Or we'd supposedly buy 300 pounds of coffee when we only used 50. Did you confront Mr. Tanner about these discrepancies? Multiple times. He said I didn't understand ranch accounting, that I should trust his management.
But you didn't trust him.
No, I kept my own inventory in my head. I knew exactly what came into that kitchen, and it never matched Buck's paperwork. Caldwell stood for cross-examination, his smile predatory. Miss Whitfield, you just admitted you kept inventory in your head. No written records? I didn't need written records. I've been cooking for that ranch for 6 years. But without documentation, you're asking this jury to trust your memory over official invoices signed by both you and Mr. Tanner. Those invoices were fraudulent. Were they? Or did you simply misremember? After all, you were grieving your father's death, dealing with the trauma of losing your home. Under such emotional strain, isn't it possible you made mistakes? Clara's jaw tightened. I didn't make mistakes. Buck was stealing. From a ranch you no longer owned. A ranch that, by your own admission, had been sold to Mr. Boone. Caldwell's voice turned sharp.
Tell me, Miss Whitfield, what's your relationship with the defendant's accuser? I don't understand.
Are you romantically involved with Elias Boone? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Harris objected. Relevance, Your Honor? I'm establishing bias, Caldwell said smoothly. If Miss Whitfield is involved with Mr. Boone, her testimony about my client becomes suspect. Judge Warren considered. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Miss Whitfield. Clara's cheeks burned. My relationship with Mr. Boone is, we're partners in managing the ranch. That's not what I asked. Are you romantically involved? She could lie, could protect herself from the implication that she'd trade her testimony for affection. But she'd promised Elias complete honesty. Yes, Clara said clearly. We're involved. But that doesn't change the facts about Buck's theft. Doesn't it? You want to believe Mr. Boone is a hero who saved your ranch. So you've convinced yourself my client is a villain.
But the truth is simpler. You are a woman scorned by Buck Tanner's practical management, now seeking revenge by supporting false accusations.
That's a lie. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you've chosen romance over reality. Chosen to believe a stranger who lied about his identity from day one over a man who dedicated months to saving your father's failing legacy. Clara stood, fury overriding courtroom protocol. Buck Tanner shot a sheriff in cold blood. He stole from every person on that ranch, and you standing there twisting my words won't change what he did. Order! Judge Warren's gavel cracked like thunder. Miss Whitfield, sit down or be removed. Clara forced herself back into the witness chair, her whole body shaking. No further questions, Caldwell said, satisfaction oozing from every syllable. Elias was called next. He took the stand with the calm of someone who'd testified in courtrooms before. Harris walked him through the basics.
How he'd bought Broken Spur Ranch, why he'd gone undercover, what he'd discovered about Buck's embezzlement scheme. And you documented everything? Harris asked. Yes. I have ledgers showing the discrepancies between Buck's reported expenses and actual costs. Witness statements from ranch hands about missing wages. Records of cattle sales that Buck never reported to the bank or the ranch owner. The ranch owner being yourself. Correct. Harris introduced the documents as evidence. Page after page of Buck's fraud, laid out in methodical detail. Then Caldwell stood for cross-examination, and the temperature in the courtroom dropped 10 degrees. Mr. Boone, you testified that you bought Broken Spur Ranch 6 weeks before arriving in Red Hollow. Is that correct? Yes. And during those 6 weeks, what did you do? I reviewed the financial records the bank provided.
identified patterns suggesting embezzlement, made plans to investigate. 6 weeks of preparation.
Very thorough. Caldwell smiled. Tell me, during those 6 weeks, did you inform Miss Whitfield that you'd bought her father's ranch? No. Did you inform the ranch hands, the bank, anyone in Red Hollow? No. It would have compromised the investigation. Or it would have revealed that you had no legal right to that ranch. Caldwell produced a document with theatrical flair. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Defense Exhibit A, a telegram from the Austin Bank and Trust, dated 2 weeks ago. Harris jumped up. I haven't seen this document. It arrived this morning. I provided copies to the prosecution 10 minutes before court convened, as required by law. Judge Warren frowned, but allowed it. What is this document, Mr. Caldwell? A telegram stating that the sale of Broken Spur Ranch to Elias Boone was never finalized. Due to irregularities in the transfer paperwork, the bank considers the transaction incomplete and ownership unclear. The courtroom exploded. Clara felt the floor tilt. Elias's face went white. That's impossible, Elias said. I have the deed. You have a preliminary deed, not a final recorded title. And according to the bank, several signatures required to complete the sale were never obtained. Caldwell turned to the jury, which means Mr. Boone has been operating under false pretenses. He doesn't own Broken Spur Ranch. He never did. Every action he took, firing Buck Tanner, accessing ranch records, making accusations of embezzlement, was done without legal authority. Your Honor, I need time to verify this. Harris's voice cracked with panic. You'll have time during recess. Court is adjourned for 2 hours. Warren's gavel fell with finality. In the courthouse hallway, Clara grabbed Elias's arm. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you actually own the ranch. I thought I did. The bank sent me a deed. I paid in full. Everything was supposed to be complete. But it wasn't? Apparently not. Danny pushed through the crowd. Is it true? You don't own Broken Spur? I don't know, Elias admitted. I need to see the actual telegram. Review what signatures are supposedly missing. And if Caldwell's right? Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. If you never owned the ranch, then everything I did was illegal. Firing Buck, accessing the accounts, even testifying against him. Elias ran a hand through his hair. Buck's lawyer is trying to get the entire case dismissed based on my lack of standing. Can he do that? If the ownership is truly in question, maybe. Pete appeared, his face grim. The townspeople are talking. Half of them think this proves you're a con man. The other half think the bank is corrupt. Either way, it's bad. Clara felt her world crumbling for the second time in 6 months. We need to fight this. With what? If I don't legally own the ranch, I can't prove Buck was stealing from me. The embezzlement charges collapse. But he still shot Sheriff Morrison. In a confrontation about ranch business that I initiated without authority. Caldwell will argue Buck was defending his rightful position as foreman against a fraud. Elias's voice was hollow. I've seen this tactic before. Undermine the primary witness, collapse the foundation of the case, walk free on technicalities. No. Clara's hands balled into fists. No. We didn't come this far to lose on a banking technicality. Clara, I own the ranch. Everyone turned to stare at her. What? Elias asked. My father owned Broken Spur Ranch. He died without a will, which means under Texas law, his property passes to his next of kin. That's me. I'm his only child. Clara's voice grew stronger. The bank sold property they didn't have clear title to,
which means their sale to you was invalid, which means the ranch still belongs to me." Elias stared at her. "Why didn't you claim this before?" "Because I didn't have money to fight the bank, didn't have resources to contest the sale. And frankly, I believed them when they said the debt gave them the right to sell." Clara met his eyes. "But if that sale is invalid, then I'm still the legal owner. And as the owner, I have standing to accuse Buck of embezzlement and to support your testimony about what you witnessed." "That's," Danny grinned, "that's brilliant." "That's going to require legal arguments we don't have time to prepare," Elias said. "Clara, this is a murder trial, not a property dispute. The judge won't allow us to suddenly introduce ownership claims. Then we make him allow it. Because right now, the alternative is letting Buck walk free." Clara turned to Harris, who'd been listening to everything. "Can you argue this? That my ownership supersedes the bank's invalid sale?" The young prosecutor looked terrified and exhilarated. "I can try, but I'll need documentation. Your father's death certificate. Proof that you're his only heir. Evidence that the bank's sale violated probate law. I have all of that. At the ranch. In the cellar under my kitchen floor." "How fast can you get it?" Clara looked at Danny. "An hour, if you ride hard." "I'll get it." The kid was already running for the doors. Harris took a breath. "All right. When court resumes, I'll request permission to enter new evidence regarding ranch ownership. Judge Warren won't like it, but if we can prove Clara's claim—" "We don't just prove her claim," Elias interrupted, his mind racing. "We prove the bank knew the sale was invalid, that they sold property they didn't own to create an opportunity for foreclosure. It's not just fraud, it's conspiracy." "That's a massive accusation." "With massive evidence. I've been documenting the bank's role in the scheme for weeks. Pemberton's visits, the inflated debt claims, the rushed foreclosure timeline. It all fits if they were planning to seize Broken Spur through manufactured crisis." Clara grabbed Elias's hand. "Are you saying the bank and Buck were working together?" "I'm saying Buck couldn't have run his scheme without bank cooperation. Someone at that bank knew the invoices were fraudulent. Someone approved loans based on false numbers. Someone— me." They turned. Pemberton stood in the courthouse hallway, looking 20 years older than he had that morning. "I approved the fraudulent invoices," the banker said quietly. "Buck and I had an arrangement. He'd inflate costs, I'd approve the loans, we'd split the profits. When the ranch defaulted, the bank would foreclose and sell to the railroad syndicate for 10 times what we paid. Everyone wins." "Except Clara," Elias said. "Except Clara," Pemberton agreed. "I told myself she'd be fine, that she'd find work elsewhere, that one widow wasn't worth derailing a profitable scheme." He looked at Clara with something like shame. "I was wrong. About all of it." Harris was frantically taking notes. "Mr. Pemberton, are you willing to testify to this? That's why I'm here. I heard Caldwell's telegram argument and realized we've gone too far. Killed a sheriff. Destroyed people's lives. For money." Pemberton's hands shook. "I want to make it right, or as right as I can." "You'll lose everything," Elias warned. "Your job, your reputation, probably face criminal charges." "I know, but I can't watch Buck Tanner walk free while I hide behind bank paperwork. That's not who I want to be." Court resumed with an electricity that made everyone sit straighter. Danny had returned with the documents, dust-stained and breathing hard. Harris stood. "Your Honor, new evidence has come to light regarding ownership of Broken Spur Ranch. The prosecution requests permission to present this evidence and call an additional witness." Caldwell objected immediately. "The trial is about murder, not property disputes." "The property dispute is central to establishing motive and credibility," Harris countered. "If the court please, We can demonstrate that Buck Tanner's crimes extend beyond murder to include conspiracy to commit fraud with the Austin Bank and Trust. Judge Warren looked skeptical. This is highly irregular, Mr. Harris. So is a bank selling property it doesn't own, and then attempting to foreclose on manufactured debt. Your Honor, I have a witness ready to testify about systematic fraud involving multiple parties. The court needs to hear this. Who's your witness? Martin Pemberton, senior loan officer at the Austin Bank and Trust. The courtroom erupted again. Caldwell went pale. Buck lunged half out of his chair before deputies restrained him. Order! Warren's gavel could have split wood. Mr. Pemberton, approach the bench. The banker was sworn in. His voice shook, but held steady as he detailed the entire scheme. The inflated invoices, the fraudulent loans, the plan to force foreclosure and sell to the railroad. Buck's role, his own complicity. And the telegram Mr. Caldwell presented this morning? Harris asked. About the incomplete sale to Mr. Boone? A fabrication. I sent it at Buck's lawyer's request, attempting to discredit Mr. Boone's testimony. The sale was complete and legal. Mr. Boone owns Broken Spur Ranch as of 6 weeks ago. Then why did you agree to send a false telegram? Pemberton's shoulders sagged. Because I was still trying to protect the scheme, still hoping we could salvage something from the wreckage. But I can't anymore. Not after hearing Miss Whitfield testify. Not after watching what this has cost her. Clara felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. Harris introduced Clara's documentation next. Death certificates, inheritance records, proof that even if the bank's sale had been invalid, Clara Whitfield was the rightful heir and owner of Broken Spur Ranch. Which means, Harris said, turning to face the jury, that Buck Tanner stole from Clara Whitfield, and when he was caught, he murdered the sheriff who came to arrest him. These aren't separate crimes. They're escalating acts of desperation by a man who couldn't accept that his corruption had been exposed. The defense fell apart after that. Caldwell tried to salvage his case with procedural arguments and character attacks, but the evidence was overwhelming. Cowboys testified about stolen wages. Bank records showed the fraudulent invoices. The deputy described Buck pulling the trigger on Sheriff Morrison. And through it all, Buck sat silent, his face carved from stone. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. When they returned, the foreman stood. We find the defendant, Buck Tanner, guilty of murder in the first degree. The courtroom exploded with noise, cheers, gasps, crying. Clara felt her knees buckle. Elias caught her, his arms steady around her waist. It's over, he said into her hair. It's finally over. Judge Warren sentenced Buck to 20 years in state prison. Pemberton was taken into custody for fraud charges. Caldwell packed his briefcase and left without speaking to anyone. Outside the courthouse, Clara stood in the afternoon sun feeling like she'd been reborn. Pete approached first, his weathered face creased in something like a smile. We're proud of you, Miss Clara. Your father would be too. The other ranch hands echoed the sentiment. One by one, they shook her hand, tipped their hats, promised to help rebuild the barn. Danny hung back until the others dispersed. What happens now? To the ranch? Clara looked at Elias. That's a good question. What does happen now? Elias pulled the deed from his pocket, the real deed, properly signed and recorded. Now we decide what kind of ranch Broken Spur becomes, and who runs it. You own it legally. On paper, but we both know who really owns it. He held out the document. Your father built this place. You've been protecting it for 6 months, and I'm just someone who bought property to stop it from being stolen. Clara didn't take the deed. I told you before, I don't want charity. It's not charity. It's partnership. Elias's voice was steady. I'll sign over 50% ownership, equal shares, equal say in every decision. You run the ranch because you know how. I handle the legal and financial complications because that's what I do. Together, we rebuild the barn, pay back wages, and turn Broken Spur into what it should have been all along. And when your firm calls with the next investigation, the next case that needs you in Montana or New Mexico, or wherever corrupt men need exposing, then we deal with it together. Maybe I go for a few months and come back. Maybe you come with me. Maybe I decide I'm tired of chasing corruption and would rather build something good instead. Elias stepped closer. I don't have all the answers, Clara, but I know I don't want to walk away from you. From this ranch. From the first place I felt like I belonged. Clara studied his face, reading the truth in his storm-gray eyes. My father used to say the best partnerships are built on honest need, not romantic notions. You need someone who knows ranching. I need someone who can fight battles in courtrooms and with banks. That's honest need. It is. But it's also more than that, isn't it? Yes. Elias didn't look away. It's also that I love you. That watching you fight for this ranch made me want to fight beside you. That I'm tired of temporary investigations and want something permanent, something real, something worth staying for. Clara's breath caught. That's the second most romantic thing you've ever said to me.
What was the first? When you told me good people shouldn't lose everything just because corrupt people are better at lying. I meant that too. I know. Clara took the deed from his hand, then pulled out a pen. Right there on the courthouse steps, she signed her name next to his on the ownership line. Partners. Equal say, equal work, equal risk. Equal reward, Elias added. That too. They sealed the agreement with a kiss that made Danny whistle and the remaining townspeople cheer. When they finally broke apart, Clara was smiling wider than she had in 6 months. Now let's go home and feed 36 hungry cowboys. And tomorrow, we start rebuilding the barn. Tomorrow? My father always said the best cure for trouble was hard work and forward motion. We've had enough trouble. Time for the forward motion part. They rode back to Broken Spur together as the sun painted the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. The burned barn stood as a reminder of what they'd survived. The ranch hands waited as proof of what they'd protected. And the future stretched ahead, uncertain, but possible. Clara May Whitfield had started the week as a widow, feeding cowboys from a kitchen that wasn't hers, signing debts she couldn't pay, watching her father's legacy crumble. She ended it as co-owner of Broken Spur Ranch, partner to a man who'd lied his way into her life and stayed by telling the truth. And proof that, sometimes, the best kind of ownership comes from refusing to surrender what you love. The ranch house kitchen smelled like fresh bread and coffee when they arrived. Clara had left dough rising that morning, a small act of faith that they'd return to need feeding. Elias helped her knead the dough, their hands working side by side in comfortable silence. You know, Clara said finally, this isn't how I imagined my life turning out. Better or worse? Different. Harder. More complicated. She looked at him. Better. 36 men ate dinner that night around tables Clara and Elias served together. Equal partners in work as in ownership. And when the last plate was cleared and the kitchen cleaned, they stood on the porch watching stars emerge over land that belonged to them both. Not because a deed said so, but because they'd fought for it, bled for it, refused to let corruption win. And that kind of ownership, the kind built on shared struggle and mutual respect and love that grew from honesty instead of deception,
That was worth more than any legal document could measure. Clara May Whitfield and Elias Boone had saved Broken Spur Ranch together. And in the process, they'd saved each other from the loneliness of fighting alone.